Franco. Thank you to all who participate, and to you, Sarah, for having been available. Indeed, I will only say that I really appreciated this OnLife initiative work, and your participation within it, Sarah. You were the media, the journalist in the group, very much focused on issues about the link between media, internet freedom, and you brought the idea of should we go for a Bill of Rights in the OnLife world. So we are pleased to listen to your presentation, and we will then have a debate after, because as the other one, there are 3 moments. We will listen to Sarah for 20 minutes approximately. Then from the chat, I will follow the chat line during the talk of Sarah, and we'll bounce back on the chat and ask Sarah to reply to some question. And then I think, Franco, you will be able to ask the floor by pushing the button on the black band on the top of the image where you see someone raising the hand. You click on that, and you will be given the floor to enter the debate and discuss with Sarah. So Sarah, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, and I'd like to thank both of you for the opportunity to do this. I have to say the OnLife project is at once the most challenging and the most interesting thing I have done as an academic. So a part of this presentation, I will go over some of the intellectual ideas we came up with, but also try to talk about the process as well. Not only the process of academics coming together and trying to create something to say to policymakers, but also now what do you do with it? Now, how do we take this intellectual capital and move it forward? So my contribution, I suppose, could best be defined to the OnLife manifesto, which is online and which you can read, is talking about rights. And to quote the Declaration of Independence in the United States, we hold these truths to be self-evident, but what truths do we hold to be self-evident in the online world? What rights do we have online? What rights should we have online? And what's interesting about that is there's not a lot of agreement about the first one, about what rights we do have, which makes the second one, what rights we should have, really quite difficult. And we also, and this is something we talked a lot about in OnLife, we talked about the fact that there's really no such thing as offline and online. And that's a theme that really resonates through the manifesto, and that Luciano talked about in a previous webinar and will keep coming back to. But it's a really, really important theme because it both enlightens and confuses us. So it enlightens us in the sense that the online sphere isn't something that's away or separate from us that we can sort of forget about when we're not engaged with it. Like, it doesn't matter if there's a lot of pornography on it, because we don't have to engage with that. That's not really what we're talking about here. We're talking more about OnLife, the fact that life and the internet and being online are now so interwoven, we can't really separate life from online. And that's a lot of where the name of the project came from. The other thing that we kind of danced around during the talks was we all have multiple identities. And in the real world, we're very comfortable with those. I am simultaneously a professor, a mother, a wife, a friend, a sister, a daughter. We're all these things. But in the virtual world, we sometimes have to be all these things at once because of the nature of it. But more importantly, we also know sometimes if I go on Amazon.com, usually I'm going on as a consumer, but sometimes I'm going on as a citizen. For example, the Bic Pen for Women campaign, which is hysterically funny. The Bic put out a pen that's for women because it's smaller and lighter. And so in the product reviews on Amazon, there's thousands of sarcastic comments about, yes, wouldn't women need a separate pen because they're different? So that's a slight digression, which those who know me is quite typical. But the idea is that when we're online, sometimes we're consumers and sometimes we're citizens and sometimes we're both at the same time. So this adds another layer of difficulty as well. The other infamous thing about the internet is right now I'm creating content. So these glasses will live in infamy because I couldn't find the right pair. But I'm also consuming content because I'll be listening to feedback. So those roles are also merged as well. So power structures and relationships are also merged. So in this welter of confusion, what do we have? You can see that I had to study Marx at some time because that'll kind of keep coming back as well. Um, so this, who are we? Are we serfs online? Are we wage slaves online? Um, our online interactions are valuable, and they're valuable in ways that most people don't think about. They're valuable in the sense that we are constantly creating digital traces or trails. And these are valuable to businesses in terms of wanting to market things to us, and they're valuable to states who seek to understand our behavior, or if you're going to be a little bit less optimistic about things, who are seeking to control our behavior. We aren't given a lot of choice in our terms of use in the online world. Typically, our internet service provider, whether it's Google or Facebook, is setting the terms of engagement. And if you stop to read the terms of engagement, and generally you basically sign away all of your rights to the information you post when you do that. Now, typically people have accepted that, either because they haven't understood it or because they haven't really considered it to be anything of value. Who cares that I Google lots of kitten videos or I buy an awful lot of books about kittens? Um, but when you merge all the data about a person, you actually have a data profile that's can mean that advertising is targeted to you, and you can lose a lot of the sense of privacy. More ominously, and this is something I study more of, if the state chooses to use that information, it can make things that you consider to be quite personal to be in the public sphere. So the question becomes, people are perceiving online use as a willing trade-off, but are we essentially being harvested with virtually no choice and information in the matter? Another further problem, and then I'll get to the six rights that I'm suggesting for this Bill of Rights, is there's a clash of cultures. And I think probably everyone who's in this chat is thinking about, not chat, or webinar, I should say, um, is thinking about the fact that the internet is grounded in this notion of utopian collaboration. That the internet and many of the things such as the World Wide Web and other really critical aspects of the internet were developed and essentially given away. That the internet developed very collaboratively, and very openly, and very rapidly. Um, how true that was then is a really interesting question for the history books. It certainly is perceived to be the truth. Um, does the internet itself either create a separate sphere in which we can be free of the regular power structures? Well, we've already decided that no, that there is no real separate internet anymore. Um, the other issue is if there's no separate sphere, then what is this? What is this online world, and who controls it? Well, more and more, it would be suggested that it's actually controlled by states and corporations. It's not controlled from the bottom up by citizens. You can point, and I take the point about Twitter and about Facebook and about social change through social media, but ultimately, who is controlling those platforms? And it's not citizens. Um, Ideals do linger, and ideals can be good things. But I think in the case of the internet, um, they can create a kind of fog in which people think they are free and equal in these alternative spaces, and they're really not. In fact, they are being harvested on a range of levels, and sometimes that's without their full understanding, and sometimes it's without their full consent. So let's think about a Bill of Rights. Let's think about the idea that that we should assert these rights. And this came during a meeting when we were talking about a lot of concepts. And I think I would definitely say I was one of the people in the room with a less grounding in philosophy. Um, and I thought, well, what happened? I actually was thinking about the communists, and I thought, well, they asserted, in the Communist Manifesto, you assert certain principles. And then I thought, oh my God, I'm American. There must be some American example. And then I thought about the Bill of Rights. And it's still a contentious document. It's not, everyone's not on board with it all the time, but it's a paradigm changer. It shifts our whole idea. And that's, I thought the idea was. So right number one, everyone has a right to privacy. Two, individuals own their own data, which is a revolutionary concept. Three, everyone has a right to a personal life. Four, no one should have to switch off completely. That actually came up as a really interesting debate in our talks. Five, switching off sometimes should be encouraged and cultivated, I might add, particularly among American teenagers, but that is just simply a personal thing. And finally, and this is the most interesting thing, and I think this is the space where this project can make a difference, there should be some kind of third spaces. There should be some kind of public agora online. Um, and I found actually when I was um, publicizing this webinar that there is a group affiliated with the UN who's tried to crowdsource a digital Bill of Rights. It's a little bit longer. It has some similar ideas, and I think where and this is a point for debate amongst the participants, where we might have a chance to make a difference is this initiative is actually coming out of the European Commission. The European Commission is saying, tell us, use academic research and use some brainstorming to tell us, how to inform policy. And so that's, I think, where the ideas of the online manifesto might have some sway. I don't know if that's right. I wanted to expand out in the last 10 minutes of this talk about the 6 different rights, and we can come back and talk about one right or the whole idea of can you assert a Bill of Rights. The right to privacy. Um, it would seem self-evident. It's very interesting to talk to people about, do you have a right to privacy online? And virtually everyone will say, yes, of course you do. If you're sending email, if you're sending, if you're chatting, if you're posting pictures, if you're talking to friends on Facebook. However, if you're talking to friends on Facebook, none of that is private. Technically, that's all via the Facebook platform. If I am sending email from my work account, that's definitely not private. And if I'm sending email from a personal account that's talking about terrorism, then that's definitely not private because that's going to fall under the Patriot Act. Probably not necessarily, but it could. So I think there's a lot of evidence that internet service providers and governments are just not clear with consumers and citizens about the way in which data are tracked and used. There, in particular, the point has been made by some scholars that we're trying to use 20th century laws to apply to a 21st century communications device. And it's just simply not working. It was as though we tried to use the same laws for television that we use for TV. I'm sorry, television that we use for newspapers, but it's an even more extreme problem. There's also, and I think B is actually the most fascinating one to me, and one that I think that I'll spend my next bit of research doing, and that's this fascinating lack of awareness about the end of forgetting. That private information about yourself is not only public, but it becomes permanent, a sort of type of digital tattoo. Recently, I heard a story about a young woman who I actually know, who had posted on Facebook, I just want to burn my school down. And she's just in a bad mood. Well, she was reprimanded by the school, and the school actually suspended her. Now, that brings up all sorts of interesting points about free speech. And some details of that story are changed, and I'm not related to that person. But about, well, and I got interested. So I Googled, how many times do people say they want to burn down their school? Well, a lot of kids say it every day. And you have this question about, well, where does just a teenager venting, and anyone who has teenagers know that they do this and this is normal, and actual norms of society collide. Um, and I thought it was interesting how unprotected that young woman was. Her lack of ability to say this is my right to free speech or something like that, because there are no norms. And it really made me reflect on how we need some. Um, so privacy is very unpredictable in the digital age. And I put a picture of the Panopticon, which I have to thank Paul Riley at Leicester University, my former PhD student. And this is this idea that in prison you can be watched at any time. You don't know when you're going to be watched. And that adds to the fear and the control. The notion that individuals own their own data, again, a little bit revolutionary here, given that the business models of most ISPs rely on harvesting data. And the states are also interested in harvesting data. Now, this could be for very beneficial reasons in the sense of better to understand the public. It could be Google flu trends. It could be something benign and useful. But unfortunately, the very same thing that can be useful can be used for security reasons in a, say, democracy, or authoritarian control reasons in a not a democracy. So the notion of meaningful informed consent imposed by law is important. And actually, I'm not sure about Britain as a whole. Franco can correct me on this at the end. I know that Britain recently moved toward more informed consent of cookies, and actually, having recently lived in Britain and now living in the United States, Britain, you could definitely feel the effect of government policy, and I think that's a good thing. And I think it really is a response to critics who say, oh, the internet, it can't be controlled. It can't be, policy doesn't affect it. Well, it does, and it should. And I think we need to start articulating that much more forcefully. Everyone has a right to a personal life. Again, a statement you would say, well, of course, we all do. And yet, we continually struggle with norms with this. And I just don't think anyone should be obliged to friend people. And I think this is a peculiar artifact of Facebook. Um, and this has struck me quite forcefully in moving from living in Europe for 17 years and moving back to the United States, where obviously my accent I'm from. Um, there is very little distance between business life and personal life in the United States. Networking amongst your friends and relating to business is very normal here. It's not normal in the United Kingdom. Would you friend your real estate agent? Here, yeah, you would. That's not that weird. Um, in the Britain, never, because that's different. So I think we need to assert that there should be spaces that are personal. And one of the main problems about this has been people have been making assumptions that things are personal and they're becoming very public. And they're becoming public in ways that are particularly toxic or threatening. I would argue for younger, more vulnerable people. Um, for example, teenagers who, have a natural interest in, tweeting about some of their experiences with alcohol or relationships, and not really thinking about the consequences of that. They're very young, you know. I think norms need to be established. Um, this is really interesting because this has been the constant cry of older policymakers who aren't as enmeshed, as it were, in the online sphere, of saying, why are people complaining about a loss of privacy? Isn't this an individual's choice? But it's not. Particularly anyone who's in education these days, whether it's middle school, high school, university education, most of the material has moved online. A lot of kids are required to be in Facebook groups or other groups to talk about things. It's very, very difficult. And also, it's a disadvantage. So I don't think it's useful to say, well, let's let corporations and let's let nations dictate the terms of this. I mean, we don't have some happy utopian place. We need to move on. But we should also say that, yeah, everyone has a right to a free and fair environment online. On that note, cultivate switching off. I always feel a little bit odd when I write this part of it because the United States press is saturated with articles about how to switch off. I got no issue switching off. I just turn off my computer at 9 o'clock every night, but apparently I'm an outlier. And this is something that needs to be cultivated. And I think someone in the group made a point. It's not so much that you completely switch off, is that you withdraw from the public to the private. And if those spaces are delineated in the online sphere, then it's far easier to do this. And finally, and this is my toughest one, and even as I wrote this slide and put this slide online, I was thinking, what do I really mean by third spaces? So maybe it's not great to write a slide where you're not 100% sure about the phrase. But what I was trying to say is that I do believe that there should be public spaces online. And I believe this because, for example, in Europe, where would you go for important political input and debates? Yes, there are lots and lots of web pages that relate to the European Parliament, the European Union, European Commission, things like this. But where's the public marketplace of ideas? Where do you go to talk about the future of the euro? In all the different countries, people talk about the euro, quite understandably, through the lens of national policy. Do we want to support another country? Is the euro hurting our economy? Is it unfair that terms dictated in another country are affecting our economy so badly? All of these things are going on. But the greater debates, the bigger debates about the future in an ever more complex world just don't seem to be taking place. And I do feel, unlike many other regions in the world, I do feel like Europe and Europeans could be world leaders in this area. The question is, and this is the note I'm going to end on. I have a couple more slides up there for people to digest in their free time. Actually, I will go to one more, just that one. Is this could be a chance to engage in a new way online. I'm just going to end on the Turkish PM's quote about social media. The best examples of lies can be found there. To me, social media is the worst menace to society. And I actually find this quote soothing because it suggests to me there is an ineluctable power of the citizenry that rises up through social media, that does confront power, that does change power structures. How permanently, I don't really know. Um, and I think that's a good thing, but I think it could be a much better thing. So I'll end on that and hopefully catch up with some of these comments that have friskily been going by and go back to Nicole or Franco, I'm not sure, for a little bit of moderation. Thank you.